Ethan Calder had always believed the stars were out of reach. He was an engineer, not a dreamer. His life on the new Earth colony, Arcadia 7, was about solving problems, fixing machines, building structures, making sure things didn't break. The vastness of the sky above always felt distant, something far beyond his control. Until the day the sky brought something to him. It was a quiet evening, just after the colony had finished its evening meal. The sun was setting in the distance, painting the sky a rich orange, and the sounds of the colony winding down filled the air. Ethan was standing at the edge of the landing dock, watching the distant ships come and go from the surface of the planet. As a child, he dreamt of space travel, but now that he was older, the reality of it felt less like adventure and more like routine. That's when he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, just a bright light streaking across the sky, too fast to be a plane, too slow to be a meteor. Ethan's eyes narrowed, focusing on the strange object as it tore through the clouds. It was falling, but it wasn't falling like a stone. It was controlled, moving with purpose. Ethan's heart began to race. He'd never seen anything like it before. His mind raced through all the possibilities. Was it a spaceship? A satellite gone off course? The object came closer, faster now, cutting through the atmosphere with a deafening roar. He stepped back, his boots hitting the ground with a thud as he watched in awe. The object came closer, so close that Ethan instinctively raised his hands to shield his face. He could see details now, shiny, metallic surfaces, glowing edges, and something inside, something moving. The object was almost upon him, and Ethan didn't know whether to run or stay still. But he was frozen, his feet planted firmly in the dirt. The thing was too beautiful, too strange. Then, with a sudden burst of force, the object landed just a few meters away, throwing up a cloud of dust and debris. Ethan shielded his face, the impact rattling his bones. When the dust settled, he stood there, stunned. In front of him was no spaceship. It was something else entirely. A figure lay crumpled in the dirt. Ethan's mind raced. Was it a human? A colonist? He didn't know. His legs moved before he could think. He sprinted toward the figure, his heart hammering in his chest. As he neared, he saw a woman. No, not just a woman. Something more. Her skin was pale, almost metallic, and her body was armored in sleek, shining materials that looked like nothing Earth had ever produced. Her eyes were closed, and she lay motionless in the dust. For a moment, Ethan was afraid she was dead, but as he knelt beside her, he noticed the faint rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, but barely. Ethan hesitated. Should he help her? She looked so out of place, like a fallen star. But something in his gut told him he couldn't just leave her there. "Hey," he said softly, reaching out to touch her arm. His fingers grazed her cold skin, and he immediately felt a slight tingle, like electricity running through him. He jerked his hand back, confused and a little afraid. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light. Ethan couldn't tell if they were blue, green, or something else entirely. She looked up at him with a gaze that seemed both unfamiliar and familiar at once, as if she had seen him before but couldn't remember where. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, the woman's lips parted. "Take me," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with an odd intensity. "Take me, I'm yours." Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the strange words. Was she delirious? Had the fall affected her mind? He'd heard of people surviving crashes with strange side effects, but this felt different. The way she said it, it wasn't a plea or a demand. It was something deeper, something almost ancient. Before he could respond, she tried to move, her body stiff, as though she was trying to rise but couldn't. Ethan quickly held her, carefully lifting her into a sitting position. Her armor seemed to hum softly as he touched it, and he could feel an unusual heat radiating from her skin. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Where did you come from?" The woman looked at him, her eyes flickering with a strange awareness, and then she said the words that would change everything. "I'm Mira. I'm not from here. And they're coming for me." Ethan didn't understand. Who was they? And why was she saying such things? He helped her to her feet, keeping a close eye on her. Her movements were graceful, even in her weakened state, but there was an undeniable power in the way she carried herself. Something about her wasn't entirely human. "Don't worry," she added in a low voice, her words heavy with hidden meaning. "You'll understand soon enough." Ethan glanced around. The sky was growing darker, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle above them. He had no idea what had just happened or who this woman really was, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in an instant. One minute, he was standing on the edge of the colony's landing dock, watching the stars as usual. The next, he was helping a woman who had fallen from the sky, but she wasn't like any person he'd ever met. Her eyes, glowing faintly, didn't look human. Her skin, pale with a metallic sheen, felt strange to the touch, and her words, they seemed so out of place. He helped her move away from the crash site, away from the wreckage of whatever ship or object she had come in. They made their way to a small building near the landing zone. One of the many emergency shelters the colony kept on standby. It wasn't much, but it was a safe place for the moment. As they entered, Ethan gently guided her to a chair. Mira, her name she had said, looked up at him, her glowing eyes flickering in the dim light of the shelter. She looked like she had seen something in him, something that made her trust him despite everything. "I don't understand," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Mira's gaze shifted away from him, focusing on the wall. "I'm not from here," she repeated, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm from far beyond this planet, beyond your world. I'm not like you." Ethan frowned, struggling to understand. "Not like me? What do you mean?" Mira took a slow breath, as though gathering her thoughts. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't seem to notice. "I'm a part of something greater," she said softly. "I was created to serve a purpose. But now, I've broken free, and they're coming for me." "Who's they?" Ethan asked. "Who's after you?" Mira's eyes flickered again, like a sudden flash of light in the dark. "The Tevran Accord," she said. "They are the ones who control the galaxy. They are the ones who have been watching you." Ethan blinked. He had heard of the Tevran Accord. They were a collection of powerful alien civilizations that had spread across the stars. He didn't know much about them, only that they kept to themselves and didn't interfere much with humanity's growth. But Mira's words didn't match what he had learned. The Accord didn't have anything to do with Earth, did they? "What do you mean, they've been watching us?" Ethan asked, his voice rising slightly in confusion. "Why would they be interested in us?" Mira's gaze sharpened. "Because humanity is special," she said, her tone low and serious. "The Accord never expected this. They never thought your kind would rise so quickly, but they underestimated you." Ethan stood up, pacing across the room, trying to make sense of it all. He had always thought Earth was just another small planet, stuck at the edge of the galaxy. Humanity was just beginning to stretch its wings, colonizing new planets, sending ships into space. But what Mira was saying, it made it sound like Earth was much more important than anyone had realized. "How? How could we be special?" Ethan asked, still trying to process everything. "What could we possibly have that the Accord wants?" Mira looked up at him again, her eyes full of a strange mixture of sadness and determination. "Your potential," she said simply. "You don't realize it yet, but your species has the power to change everything. You've already begun to evolve faster than the Accord thought possible. They can't control you, and that terrifies them." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had always thought of humanity as a species that was just beginning to reach out into the stars, trying to find its place in the universe. He had never imagined that they could be seen as a threat by alien civilizations. But the way Mira spoke, it was as though she believed humans had something incredible inside them, something that could shift the balance of power across the galaxy. Mira's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "That's why I'm here," she said. "I was sent by the Accord to keep you from realizing your potential. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't follow through with their orders." Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't just a soldier or an agent. She was something else, something that had been shaped by forces he couldn't control. And now, she was asking for his help. "Why didn't you?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. "Why didn't you follow their orders?" Mira's expression faltered. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering. "Because I've seen what humanity is capable of," she said. "I've seen your strength, your will to survive. I've watched you fight, grow, and adapt. I've seen you do the impossible. And I couldn't stop you. I couldn't stop you from becoming who you are meant to be." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't fully understand what Mira was talking about, but the weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He had always thought of humanity as small, weak even, compared to the great civilizations that must have existed out there in the stars. But now, for the first time, he started to wonder if perhaps they had more power than anyone had ever imagined. Mira closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they looked even more intense than before. "You're not alone," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "The Accord will come for me. They'll come for you too. And when they do, you'll have to decide. Will you let them control you, or will you fight?" Ethan felt a surge of determination rise within him. He didn't know what was going to happen next, or how he could possibly fight something as powerful as the Tevran Accord. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let them take Mira, and he wasn't going to let them control humanity. He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll fight," he said firmly. "We'll fight for our future." Mira gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell him that she had placed her trust in him. The fight for humanity's future had just begun. The days after Mira's arrival passed quickly, but Ethan could feel the weight of what she had said pressing down on him. The Tevran Accord, the powerful alien civilizations that controlled the galaxy. It all sounded like something from a story, a distant fantasy. But everything about Mira, the way she looked, the things she said, told him it was real. And it wasn't just a story, it was happening right now. Ethan spent most of his time in the colony's command center, staring at maps, security feeds, and ship tracking systems. He couldn't stop thinking about Mira's words. She had said the Accord was watching them, watching Earth. But why? What was it about humanity that was so important to them? Why had they decided to interfere now? He needed answers. One evening, as he worked late in the control room, Mira came to find him. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette faintly glowing in the dim light. Her presence always made the room feel a little colder, a little more alien. But Ethan had grown used to it. She wasn't a threat to him, not anymore. Not in the way he had first feared. "Ethan," Mira said, her voice calm, yet urgent. "We don't have much time." He turned away from the display, looking at her. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "The Accord is closer than we thought," Mira said, stepping into the room. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "They've tracked me. They know I'm here." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had hoped they would have more time to prepare, to figure out what to do. But it seemed like they were running out of time faster than they could handle. The thought of the Accord's hunters coming to Arcadia 7 sent a chill down his spine. If they had the power to wipe out entire planets, what chance did they have? "How do they know?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mira's expression grew dark. "The Accord has advanced technology. They can trace me, even if I try to hide. They've been tracking my every move ever since I escaped. They know I'm here on this planet. It's only a matter of time before they arrive." Ethan stood up, pacing the small room. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. "We need to prepare," he said finally. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to show up." Mira nodded. "I agree, but it's not just about hiding. If they catch me, they'll take me back. And once they have me, they'll take everything I know and use it against humanity. They'll wipe out anyone who stands in their way." Ethan felt his heart race. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. It wasn't just about Mira anymore. It was about all of humanity. The Accord had their sights set on Earth, and if Mira was right, they saw something in humanity that could shake the entire galaxy. "We need to fight," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We can't let them take you. We can't let them win." Mira looked at him, her glowing eyes full of something that Ethan couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Relief? It was hard to say. But she gave a small nod, as if she had expected him to say that. "There's more you need to know," she said, stepping closer. "The Accord doesn't just want me because of the secrets I carry. They want humanity because of something much bigger." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Mira took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Humanity's potential is unlike anything the Accord has ever seen. Your species has the ability to evolve, adapt, and learn faster than any other. And the Accord is terrified of that. They fear what will happen when humans unlock their true potential. That's why they've kept their distance for so long. They don't want you to reach the level of power you're capable of." Ethan shook his head. "I don't understand. What do you mean by unlocking our potential?" Mira paused, as if searching for the right words. "Humans are different. You've always been different. The Accord believes you have a latent ability within you, something that could give you the power to challenge them, something you haven't even begun to tap into yet. And that's what they're afraid of. If you ever learn how to unlock it, the galaxy will change. The balance of power will shift." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always seen humanity as small and insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy. But if what Mira was saying was true, if humanity had the ability to become something greater than the Accord, then everything he knew about the universe had just changed. "We have to stop them," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "We can't let them control us. We have to fight back." Mira's gaze softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "It's not just about fighting them. You have to understand, humanity must be ready. You have to unlock this potential, this power, within yourselves. If you don't, if you stay hidden and weak, the Accord will wipe you out before you ever have a chance." Ethan clenched his fists. "How do we do that? How do we unlock our potential?" Mira's expression grew serious again. "I don't know, but I can help you start. I can teach you the first steps. The rest is up to you." Ethan nodded, determination burning in his chest. This was it. They had no more time to waste. The Accord was coming, and they had to be ready. He turned toward the command center, where a map of the colony and its defenses lay in front of him. "We start by preparing the colony. We'll need every person we can get, every resource, every weapon. And then we'll figure out how to unlock humanity's potential." Mira stood silently beside him, watching him with a sense of trust and hope that he hadn't expected. "Are you ready?" she asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes, let's make sure humanity is ready." Ethan felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him. What he had once thought was just another day on the edge of the galaxy had turned into something much larger. Mira had told him that humanity was on the brink of something incredible, something that could change the entire balance of the galaxy, and the Tevron Accord was coming to stop them. They didn't have much time. For the past few days, Ethan had worked nonstop. The colony was on high alert, and preparations were underway. It wasn't much, just a small colony with limited resources, but he knew that if they didn't take a stand now, they would be wiped out before they even knew what hit them. He could already feel the eyes of the Accord on them, even though they hadn't shown themselves yet. Mira had said they were coming. He believed her. Mira had also promised to help. She had begun teaching him what she knew about humanity's hidden potential. It wasn't easy, and every lesson felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. But something was happening. Every day, Ethan could feel a shift. Something in the air, something in the way people were starting to look at each other. There was a growing sense of purpose, of power. It was early in the morning when Mira arrived at the command center. Ethan was already there, studying maps and old reports from the colony's first few years. He looked up when she entered, noticing the determination in her eyes. She had been quieter lately, her usual calm demeanor tinged with urgency. "Mira," Ethan said, standing up. "What's going on? What have you found?" Mira's gaze was steady, her voice calm, but there was a fire behind her words. "I've been feeling it," she said, her eyes glinting with something ancient. "The shift, it's happening. You and your people are waking up to something." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Waking up? What do you mean?" Mira stepped closer, her presence somehow making the room feel both colder and warmer at the same time. "I told you before, humanity is different. You have abilities, powers, potential, and you're starting to access them." Ethan felt a mix of excitement and fear. He had thought the changes he'd seen were just temporary, a result of the stress they were under. But now, hearing Mira say it out loud, he realized something deeper was happening. His thoughts were clearer than before. He could make decisions faster, understand people better, and even his reflexes were sharper. And it wasn't just him. He had seen the change in the people around him. They were becoming more focused, more driven. But the question still lingered. What exactly was happening? "How do we harness this?" Ethan asked. "How do we make it real?" Mira looked at him for a long moment before answering. "It's not something that can be controlled easily. You can't just decide to use it. It's something that has to come from within. You have to let go of fear, of the limitations you've been taught your whole life. Only then can you access what's inside you." Ethan felt a spark of something deep within himself. Fear. It had always been a part of him, something that held him back from taking risks, from making the hard decisions. But if what Mira said was true, if humanity really did have something inside them that could change everything, then he had to let go. He had to take that first step. "I think I understand," Ethan said slowly, clenching his fists. "It's about believing in what we can become. We have to let go of what we think we are and realize what we can be." Mira nodded. "Exactly." Just as she spoke, a loud noise interrupted the silence. The base alarms went off, echoing through the building. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Mira's face hardened, her eyes flashing with worry. "They're here," she said quietly. "The Accord has arrived." Ethan rushed to the nearby console, his mind racing. The colony's sensors had picked up multiple ships approaching from space. They were large, alien, and unmistakable. The ships of the Tevran Accord. They were here, just as Mira had warned. "Get everyone to the shelters," Ethan shouted, pressing buttons on the console to alert the colony's security teams. "We don't have much time." Mira turned to him, her face filled with determination. "Ethan, listen. The Accord's ships are powerful, but they're not invincible. If you want to stand a chance, you have to be ready. You have to awaken your people's power." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was right. They couldn't hide forever. The time to act was now. He turned back to the console, sending out orders to every station in the colony. "Prepare the defenses. Get everyone ready for whatever comes next." But even as he gave the orders, a part of him was focused on something deeper. A sense of clarity, like he had tapped into something that made everything feel sharper. He could feel it. It was the awakening Mira had talked about. The ground beneath them shook as the first of the Tevran ships touched down on Arcadia 7. A heavy silence fell over the colony. Everyone knew what was coming. Mira's voice cut through the tension. "You can do this, Ethan. You can lead them. You just have to believe in yourselves." Ethan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're ready," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The colony's defenders had gathered, and the people were in position, armed and waiting. Ethan stood in front of them, looking out at the approaching ships. The Accord's forces were landing, and their soldiers began to disembark, their advanced armor gleaming under the alien suns. "Remember," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear swirling inside him. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for our future." As the Tevrim soldiers advanced, Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He could feel the power inside him now. It wasn't just his will to fight. It was something more, something that had been awakened in the depths of humanity. He opened his eyes, meeting Mira's gaze. She was standing beside him, a silent understanding passing between them. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of," Ethan said. The first shot was fired, and humanity's fight for survival began. The air was thick with tension. Ethan stood at the front of the colony's defense line, staring out at the landing zone where the Tevrim Accord ships had just touched down. The ground shook beneath his feet as the massive alien vessels released their ramparts, and armed soldiers began to pour out, their movements sharp and organized. They were a terrifying sight, advanced, calculating, and ready to crush anything in their path. Ethan's heart was pounding. He had never imagined he would be leading a defense against an army like this. But there was no turning back now. The people of Arcadia 7 were ready, and they had no choice but to fight for their survival. Mira stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if she could feel the enemy's every movement. "They're here," Mira said, her voice low but steady. Ethan nodded, trying to calm his nerves. "We've prepared for this. We can hold them off." "Don't focus on holding them off," Mira said, her voice sharp. "Focus on what comes next. The real battle isn't against their soldiers. It's against their control over you, over all of us." Ethan wasn't sure what she meant, but he didn't have time to ask. The enemy was getting closer. "Ready the weapons," Ethan barked to the team behind him. The colony's defense forces had set up barricades and automated turrets, but there weren't many of them. The colonists had no experience with full-scale combat. They had spent most of their time building and exploring, not fighting for their lives. But now, they had no choice. The first shot rang out. It came from one of the automated turrets, but it missed. A few seconds later, the Tevrim soldiers returned fire with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The blast sent sparks flying as it hit the nearby barricade, sending debris into the air. "Move," Ethan shouted. "Return fire." The battle had begun. Ethan's heart raced as he picked up his rifle and aimed it at the advancing enemy. His hand shook, but his mind was clear. Mira's words echoed in his head. "The real battle isn't against their soldiers. It's against their control over you." What did that mean? He didn't have time to think about it. The enemy was too close now. He fired, hitting one of the Tevrim soldiers square in the chest. The alien's armor absorbed most of the blast, but it stumbled, momentarily stunned. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired again, hitting the soldier in the head. It collapsed to the ground with a sickening thud. He felt a rush of adrenaline. The fear had faded, replaced by something else. Something more powerful. He wasn't sure where it was coming from, but it was like his body was moving on its own, faster, stronger, more focused. It was the same feeling he had been experiencing ever since Mira had started talking about unlocking humanity's potential. The shift was happening, and it was happening to everyone. "All units, return fire," a commander shouted from the rear. The colony's forces had taken their positions behind makeshift barricades, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Tevrim soldiers advanced with calculated precision, their energy weapons cutting through the colony's defenses with ease. But Ethan wasn't alone. Mira was fighting beside him, moving with the fluidity of someone who had trained for this moment for a lifetime. Her eyes glowed brighter in the chaos, as if the battle itself was feeding her power. She moved like a shadow, taking down enemy soldiers with ease, her movements so fast they were almost impossible to track. Ethan watched in awe as she dropped another Tevran soldier in a matter of seconds, her hands glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. There was no hesitation in her actions, only a deep, unshakable focus. She was not just a soldier. She was something more, something that had been awakened by the same force that was now coursing through him. Focus, Ethan. Mira's voice broke through his thoughts. Don't just fight them. Understand them. You have to feel what they're doing, anticipate their next move. Ethan blinked, trying to process her words. She was right, of course. The Tevran soldiers were highly trained, but they were predictable. Their movements, their strategies, they all followed a pattern. The problem was, Ethan had always relied on his instincts. He had never trained for a battle like this. But Mira's words made something click inside him. He began to feel the flow of the battle, sensing where the enemy would strike next. His body moved in sync with his thoughts, his rifle finding its mark with every shot. He could hear the crackle of energy weapons around him. But he was no longer distracted by the noise. He was focused, locked in. The battlefield was a chessboard, and every move had a purpose. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was controlling the flow of the fight. The tide of the battle shifted. The colony's forces, inspired by Ethan's sudden transformation, began to fight back with newfound strength. The Tevran soldiers, once so confident in their power, were starting to falter. The colonists weren't just defending anymore. They were attacking, pushing forward, using their knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the enemy. But just as the colony's forces began to gain ground, something changed. The Tevran forces began to reorganize, moving with even more precision. Ethan knew what that meant. The first wave had been a test. Now, the Accord was sending in reinforcements. They're calling for backup, Mira said, her voice tense. We need to move fast. If they bring in their main force, we won't stand a chance. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. We can't let them regroup. We push them back now. He led the charge, sprinting toward the nearest group of Tevran soldiers. The battle was far from over, but something had changed. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, and for the first time, Ethan felt like they had a real chance. The enemy was strong, but they weren't invincible. And humanity, it seemed, was ready to prove that. The battle raged on, but the tide was slowly shifting in humanity's favor. The Tevran soldiers were relentless, but the people of Arcadia 7 had found something in themselves that made them stronger. It wasn't just the weapons they used or the strategies they had prepared. It was something deeper, something they had never realized was inside them. Ethan stood at the front of the battle lines, his rifle raised and his eyes focused. His heart was pounding, but it was no longer fear that fueled him. It was determination. He could feel the power inside him now. The shift that Mira had talked about was real. Humanity had awoken to its potential. Beside him, Mira moved like a shadow, taking down enemy soldiers with ease. She had warned him that the true battle wasn't against the Tevran forces themselves, but against the control they had over humanity. And now, Ethan understood what she meant. The real fight wasn't about defeating the soldiers. It was about freeing his people from the fear and limitations that had held them back for so long. Stay focused, Ethan shouted to the colonists around him. We can win this. His words had a powerful effect. The people around him, once unsure and terrified, were now fighting with everything they had. They were no longer just defending their homes. They were fighting for their future, for their freedom. The Tevran soldiers, despite their advanced technology and training, were starting to lose ground. The colonists had adapted quickly, using their knowledge of the land to outmaneuver the enemy. But there was something more happening. The energy from the battlefield seemed to be feeding them, making them stronger with every passing minute. Mira noticed it too. She had been observing Ethan closely, watching how his movements had become sharper, more confident. He wasn't just reacting to the battle now. He was anticipating the enemy's moves before they even made them. He was no longer just leading the fight. He was commanding the flow of the battle itself. "You're getting better," Mira said as they fought side by side, taking down another wave of Tevran soldiers. "You're learning how to control it." Ethan didn't have time to reply. The next wave of Tevran soldiers was already advancing. These were different from the ones they had fought so far. More advanced, more coordinated. They were here to crush the resistance once and for all. "They're sending in their elite troops," Mira said, her voice tight with concern. "We need to fall back. We can't take them on directly." Ethan looked around. The colony's defenders were still holding their ground, but it was clear they wouldn't last much longer if the Tevran elite joined the fight. He didn't want to retreat, but he knew Mira was right. If they stayed out in the open, they would be wiped out. "We need to get to the underground bunkers," Ethan said, his mind racing. "That's our best chance to regroup and make a stand." Mira nodded. "I'll cover the retreat. You get the others to safety." Ethan hesitated for a moment, watching as Mira moved with deadly precision, taking down the advancing soldiers one by one. There was no one else he trusted more in this fight. He knew she would make sure they got to safety. He turned and began to lead the colonists toward the underground bunkers. The sounds of battle echoed behind them, but Ethan kept his focus ahead. The colonists followed him, but many of them looked back, unwilling to leave the fight. Ethan's heart ached for them. They were brave, but they also needed to survive. They couldn't win if they were all wiped out. As they made their way through the tunnels toward the bunkers, Ethan felt the pressure building. They were running out of time. The Tevran forces would be on them soon, and they had to be ready. He didn't know how to defeat an enemy as powerful as the Accord, but he knew that there was no turning back. When they finally reached the bunkers, Ethan found himself standing at the entrance, looking out at the battlefield. He could see the smoke rising in the distance, the flashes of energy weapons lighting up the sky. But something was different now. The power inside him was stronger than ever, and he could feel it spreading through the others too. The battle wasn't over yet. "Get ready," Ethan shouted to the colonists. "We can't just hide here. We need to fight." Mira appeared beside him, her expression grim but determined. "Ethan, it's not just about fighting. You need to understand how to control the power. If you don't, you'll never defeat them." He nodded, understanding what she meant. The power they had unlocked wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about understanding. Understanding how to use it, how to control it, how to make it work for them. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had to trust himself. He had to trust that humanity had the strength to rise up and fight. The power they had been given wasn't just for survival. It was for something more. He opened his eyes and looked at Mira. "I'm ready." Mira's gaze softened, and she nodded. "Then let's do this." They stepped out of the bunkers, joining the colonists in the final stand. The Tevran forces were closing in, but Ethan could feel something shift within him. He could see the movements of the enemy before they made them, hear the rhythm of their actions. It was like the battlefield had become a symphony, and he was the conductor. He raised his hand, and the people of Arcadia 7 followed his lead. The first wave of Tevran soldiers charged forward. But this time, the colonists were ready. They moved as one, anticipating every move the enemy made. The tide of the battle had turned. Ethan felt the power inside him grow stronger with every passing moment. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for the future of humanity, and humanity was ready to rise. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke billowed in every direction as the final battle between the Tevran Accord and the people of Arcadia 7 reached its peak. Ethan stood at the front of the colony's forces, feeling the weight of the moment. His body pulsed with energy, the power he had unlocked within himself stronger than ever before. It wasn't just his will anymore. It was something deeper, something that connected him to everyone around him. The Tevran forces were relentless. Their soldiers were heavily armored and highly trained, their energy weapons slicing through the air with deadly precision. But the colonists weren't backing down. They had fought too hard to give up now. They had awakened something within themselves, a strength that came from deep within their human nature. Ethan felt the energy building within him, like a tide rising. He had never experienced anything like this before. He could sense the movements of the enemy soldiers, see their patterns before they even made them. It was as if the battlefield itself was a living, breathing thing, and he was part of it. "We can do this," Ethan muttered to himself. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. He knew this was it, the final stand, the last chance to defeat the Tevron Accord and secure humanity's future. Mira was beside him, her expression hard, but her eyes burned with the same fire that Ethan felt within himself. She had trained him, helped him unlock the power that had been lying dormant in humanity for so long. And now, it was time to use that power to protect everything they had fought for. "We have to take them down now," Mira said, her voice low. "If we don't, they'll never stop. The Accord will keep coming, and they'll crush everyone in their path." Ethan nodded. He understood. This wasn't just about Arcadia 7 anymore. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Tevram Accord had been trying to control them for too long, to subjugate them to their will. Now, humanity had shown that it wouldn't be so easily controlled. The Tevran forces were closing in, their elite soldiers leading the charge. But this time, the colonists were ready. They had learned how to fight, how to control their newfound abilities. Their movements were sharper, their tactics more precise. They were no longer just defending. They were attacking. The balance had shifted. Ethan raised his hand, and the colonists followed his lead. He could feel the energy around them, a force that seemed to amplify with every passing second. The air was thick with it, and he knew that this was their moment. The Tevram soldiers charged forward, but Ethan could feel their every move before they made it. He could sense their hesitation, their uncertainty. They didn't know what they were up against. "Now," Ethan shouted. He released the energy inside him, and the ground beneath his feet trembled. A wave of force radiated outward, knocking back the first wave of Tevran soldiers. The air was filled with the sound of energy blasts and explosions as the colonists launched their counterattack. The Tevran soldiers scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The colonists were already upon them, moving faster and with more precision than the Tevran had anticipated. Mira fought by his side, her movements a blur as she took down enemy soldiers with incredible speed. She was a force unto herself, a living weapon that had been honed for this moment. But even she could feel the difference now. The colonists were no longer fighting out of fear. They were fighting with purpose, with a sense of unity that had never existed before. Ethan could see it in their eyes. They weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for their future. The battle raged on, but the Tevran forces were beginning to falter. The colonists, despite being outnumbered, were pushing them back. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the enemy soldiers retreat, unable to keep up with the pace of the fight. It was working. They were winning. But the Tevram Accord wasn't about to give up easily. The last of their elite soldiers pushed forward, their leader emerging from the ranks. A towering figure, clad in black armor, his eyes burning with an unyielding hatred. "This ends now," the Tevran leader said, his voice amplified by a suit of advanced technology. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the moment. The leader of the Tevran forces had come to finish the job. But Ethan didn't hesitate. He had been training for this moment his entire life, and now he understood what Mira had meant. It wasn't just about strength. It was about understanding the flow of the battle, the rhythm of the fight. "You are not in control here," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the Tevran leader. "This is humanity's fight now." The Tevran leader smirked, raising his weapon. "You are nothing but insects. You will fall, just like the others before you." Ethan's eyes burned with determination. He could feel the energy coursing through him, the strength of every person fighting alongside him. The power was theirs now, not the Tevrans. With a roar, Ethan charged forward, his body moving faster than it ever had before. He could feel the energy in the air, guiding him, pushing him. He raised his hand, and the world around him seemed to slow. The Tevran leader fired his weapon, but Ethan was already there, dodging with inhuman speed. In one swift motion, Ethan closed the distance between them. The Tevran leader swung his weapon, but Ethan was too quick. He ducked, sidestepped, and in the blink of an eye, he was on the leader. With a surge of energy, he struck. The Tevran leader fell to the ground, his weapon clattering against the dirt. The battlefield fell silent. Ethan stood over him, breathing heavily. The fight was over. Humanity had won. The colonists erupted in cheers, but Ethan's mind was already moving ahead. They had won this battle, but the war wasn't over. The Tevran Accord would regroup. They would come back. But now, humanity had something they had never had before: hope. Mira stood beside him, her expression soft but proud. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Ethan nodded, but he knew that this victory wasn't just his. It was the victory of every person who had fought beside him, every person who had unlocked their true potential. Humanity had proven that it was capable of more than anyone had ever imagined, and the galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood up and said, "We are here, and we are ready."